first of all, just out of curiosity, did you go to the movies a lot as a kid? And if you did, were there any films or filmmakers that really meant a lot to you?
Oh, I was in a small town in East Texas. It was great. There was a certain innocence about it. I went to drive-in movies, and this is in the South, so I saw these Elvis movies, all these great science fiction films. I loved movies, but I can't explain to anyone how far away the idea of making a movie yourself was to my consciousness until I was 18 to 20. I mean, seriously, just the idea that there was a director or someone. The only director you knew at that time was Alfred Hitchcock, just because he was kind of famous, but didn't really. So movies were a huge part of my life. Loved them, but it never, as far as it could be my own artistic medium or means of expression, they were just these things that came from Hollywood. But I literally lived in the last picture show type town. We had one theater, the Cine, and a new film would open every Friday, one a week. It was, whatever in the distribution world, the fourth tier, films would eventually come to my little town. You might have heard about them. And, it'd be a John Wayne movie one week and Evel Knievel the next and some science. It was great. Yeah. We just went to the show, we called it. Right. So I had this kind of idyllic, even though it was the 70s, it felt like the 50s, when people think of the old-timey, American movie upbringing. So it was all kind of great. So I just love movies, but it wasn't, at some point when I was about in 5th grade, I realized I was sort of a writer. I was writing stories, and I thought that was kind of my creative outlet. It was a long time before those two things merged, and I thought, you can write movies.
Right. Well, I guess that's sort of the next question. What was the moment where you realized that films did come from a director, or that there was this process behind it? What made you aware of that?
Well, it was a slow kind of becoming aware. I think, I think in high school, I remember seeing Annie Hall, and I had some idea who Woody Allen was as a performer, but he also wrote and directed that movie that I loved so much. That was like my favorite movie of that year, more than Star Wars, more than anything else. I was like, wow, it just really resonated with me. And then I immediately liked the weird stuff. I saw like Eraserhead as a midnighter, and then in college I saw Raging Bull. That kind of really changed my whole view. And that's when I was more serious about it. I was kind of studying theater and writing plays, and that's when I thought, wow, film can do that, Then I started something clicked in me. I started thinking about films a little bit. And then I realized, I had stories in my head, like visual. I had this kind of visual ability I didn't really know about, that I could had a visual memory. Right. I could kind of memorize, and I saw all the shots, and something happened, and I just realized, I'm kind of more of a film guy than theater or literary, and it fit my personality too. I liked working with a lot of people and organized, and I don't know. That was kind of a revelation to me, but it took a while. It takes a while. There's no one eureka moment. It's just a slow realization, and then it's getting courage, because again, these are big things that come from far away. I didn't know anybody who made films. I didn't grow up in an industry town. I'm in a little town in Texas, so it was kind of, God, can you do that? It was really the indie films. Once I'd done a couple years of college, I was living in Houston and starting to watch independent films, and then I found myself in theaters all the time, and I'm watching like Return of the Secaucus 7 or My Dinner with Andre or Chan is Missing, or these indie films made very cheaply, and then I'm thinking, so you can just buy a camera and go do that. It's some of Eagle Pennell's films, Last Night at the Alamo, and so that's the early 80s, and I really love that era, even though that's when people would say, films were starting to get bad then, but the indie world was really starting to take off. Every year there was a handful of really wonderful indie films, so that just gives you encouragement. They're not necessarily the films that want to make you make films, they're not, but they're the films that make you think you can make films, which is as important as anything.
Sure. And today a kid who goes to the movies and has that kind of an epiphany can go and buy a lightweight camera or whatever and do that. At the time, that wasn't really an option. So how did you actually sort of make the jump to the other side of the camera? Yeah,
it was sort of technically intimidating back then. There was film is expensive, all this equipment, all this. So I kind of like that as a barrier, actually. I thought, well, I'd saved up my money. I bought some film equipment, a camera, a bunch of editing equipment, projector, a bunch of film stock. And I just sort of taught myself all that. And nothing to be intimidated by, but it teaches you a certain economy if film is costing a lot.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's still the goal. I love it now. This is the best time ever to be a filmmaker right now, because you really can make a movie the way a novelist or a painter, it's like, well, I'm a writer. Well, what are you writing?
Right.
It used to be, I'm a filmmaker. It's like, if the man would ever give me money, I would, you could sit around for decades complaining.
Right.
And it just sort of, there's no excuses, so that's great.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean everyone should make a movie, but at least you can if you do have that talent. I think if you're 20 now, your entire life, the idea of making a movie has been at your fingertips, where it wasn't mine.
Right.
Certainly. It is now, which I think is great. I have 2 8-year-old daughters who are, we have a flip camera, they're shooting stuff, they're making stories, and, they enjoy it.
Creative outlets, yeah.
Yeah.
So what can you recall, or I'm sure you recall a lot, but what can you share about that first film experience, the first one that you got under your belt?
The first films I made, the first feature. How do you define
right,
first
well,
film? Because I shot like 5 years of films before.
Sort of a lot of shorts and things like that.
Yeah.
So what for you was what sort of paved the way for the opportunity to really do this for a living? Was there a turning point?
No, it was a slow process. Like anything, I think stories sound good when there's like one big,
right.
But in fact, by the time I was being treated like an overnight success, I had been making films, whatever, 8 years, been a closet full of short films. I had done a feature on Super 8 before, so by the time anyone saw Slacker, which was the first film that got national distribution and people were paying to see, I felt I had already,
put in a lot of time.
I had put in my decade practically. I had put in exactly a decade of watching 600 movies a year, reading about cinema. I was, I could have, I had dedicated 10 solid years every waking second. Right. So I felt ready to go to whatever new level. But each step is could I finish my Super 8 feature? It's like, well, could I even finish a film? Yeah. Do I have a vision, or can I finish it? A lot of people just can't. They want to, but they find other things to do, and they're not meant to do it. So I really pushed myself hard for 2 years to finish, my first bigger film. And then, God, can I entice others to work with me? Right. Can I work with actors? Can I work with a crew? Can I, whatever that leadership qualities, and, can I do that? So even though people think, oh, that's a no-budget film, and that's a huge personal challenge to manage all the people and the egos and still, hold on to your vision for the film. And, so, okay, you go, okay, I think I can do that, as hard as it is, but as fun as it is, it's incredible. And so then the next step for me, and I was lucky to have the opportunity, was, can I take money from a studio and make my next film, the script I wrote, and work with that system? Can I take notes from a studio head and executives watching dailies and other kind of pressures?
And were you able to?
That was Dazed and Confused. I was like, okay, I can do that. Right. It has its own, but I was just learning, like, systematically how you make a film in different systems. So by the time those first 3 films, for me, little budget, little more budget, and then studio budget, small studio budget. Right. In fact, Days is considered an indie film because it was sort of distributed indie. Right. But I had the full studio experience, cards, notes, committee, just the whole. I went through the system. So I was kind of now ready at any level to make whatever film I was trying to make. I could kind of plug it in and work from that place in the, in and around the industry, I guess. So I don't know.
And during those early sort of years, I guess early 90s when those were happening, were you still operating out of Texas, or was there ever, even to this day, do you go out to Hollywood, or where do you?
Yeah. Well, I think by the time I came along, I mean, I'm sort of my generation is the beneficiary of the previous generation, you know, the Scorsese's, Bogdanovich's, Demi's, Coppola's, those guys who went to Hollywood, worked for Roger Corman, got their foot in the industry, got an agent, you know, and eventually got to the place where they could make their films. It was such a struggle. There was one game in town. And I think because of their success, and, you know, people like this merging of, say, the New York independent scene, John Cassavetes, Shirley Clark, all the great indie films that had been made then that really didn't have anywhere to go, you know. Whatever festivals there were, screenings at different theaters, but there was not like an indie market the way that emerged in the 70s and especially the 80s. So by the time myself and people of my generation come around, there's already an industry there, you know. Spike Lee, Jim Jarmusch, Coen Brothers, John Sayles, you know, they had already kind of been there, and people had made money off films. There was a system, there were theaters in every town. So it was kind of paved so much, it was so much easier for guys of, you know, our generation, because you don't have to go to LA. I could make my own, I didn't have to make an exploitation film to prove I was a filmmaker and had some value. I made a film from my own backyard that actually got a national audience. That would have been unthinkable 10 years before, 20 years before. So I didn't have, in other words, I didn't have to move to LA or New York or San Francisco or anywhere. I kind of stayed where I was in Austin. The next film I had, Dazed and Confused, was set in Austin, or set in Texas. So it just made sense for me to shoot there. It was cheaper than, you know, so it used to be like, well, you got to get out here, you know, and I kind of didn't. They came to me, you know. I mean, the Sundance Film Festival, that didn't exist a long time ago. So you go to Sundance, you meet people from the industry who want to help you. You know, it's kind of, it was so much a system, and thanks to people like Robert Redford and, you know, who created this, you know, storytelling mecca that is Sundance, that is the workshops, and, you know, I just kind of sit here pretty grateful that was already done. I didn't have to go, you know, blaze a new trail. You know, it was sort of already there.
And you mentioned a bunch of the people who came up at about the same time as you with this sort of what people today look back at and they say this was like the indie boom. This was when it suddenly it took off. And I mean, it's not been an easy 2 decades for indie film with the economy, you know, up, as you know, as well.
The last 5 years, especially.
Certainly, right. But I guess I wonder, do you what as almost stepping back and looking at it, just removing yourself, what has your generation of those sort of top filmmakers, indie filmmakers, what would you say the major changes were that those films represented? Just the stylistically,
in the 90s,
everything. Those early 90s guys, including you.
God, I mean, it's all over the map. It's particular to each filmmaker. I mean, there was a huge, I think there's a much more mainstream acceptance of gay or new queer cinema. I think that's a big breakthrough. There's a lot of, I think, even more so than before, films that were kind of heading towards studio film status, not only in their style and genre, but their box office appeal. You know, like you saw these huge hits come out of the indie world, and that's a double-edged sword. You know, that's good, and then that's sort of bad, because the indie distributors themselves are starting to become bigger studio. They pretty much studios at this point. They go, well, hell, we can buy a film for a little bit, or make a film and it can make $100 million. So, you know, they're thinking exactly like studios. It just kind of makes the smaller film even that much small time. You know, it's all like Broadway, off Broadway, and then off Broadway. You know, like the film world now, I think there's like off indie. There has to be. You know, so I do appreciate the people who aren't necessarily swinging for the fences in their distribution. Just let's put the films out there, and if we can make a little money, good. But that's no one's business plan. It's too expensive. So I don't know, I'm talking business here, but but from the 90s, I don't know, it's very diverse. I mean, I look around when I meet with directors of my own generation, and we all look at each other and go, God, it's gotten so hard. And then I go, because there's a little bitch fest for a second about how hard it is to get money for your next project. And then I go, whoa, we got lucky. We got really lucky. We got a lot of films made. I think that about myself. I got so many films made in the 90s and in the 2000s that would never get made today. I don't think they would get made. It's just a different time. So, like, we're kind of there by by birth, you know. If like when I first submitted a film to Sundance, I heard at that time, this is early 90s, there had been like 200 and something submissions. And I remember talking to a filmmaker going, 200? That's so many films. Like, I visualized credit card maximization, bankruptcies, families destroyed. You know, it was so hard and expensive to make a movie. I mean, now they get like 5, 6, 4,000. I don't even know the number, but it's many thousands.
Yeah.
But it's not, you're not mortgaging houses. You know, you're making that film for 10,000,
Right.
you know, 20, I mean, 100. It's not the hundreds of thousands people are sinking in. So it's kind of, you know, everyone's can make a film and submit it. So that's the good news.
People, I saw it last night, I've seen it so many times, always try to find, I think it's rooted in the whole auteur theory, they're trying to find a common thread between all of your films. And they really struggle because you have gone across the genres, you have done big movies, small movies, studio, India. I guess the question I have to ask you is, do you see a common thread or thematically things that you keep coming back to? The only things that I can sort of see as commonalities, the characters, I guess, tend to be sort of introspective. There's a lot of dialogue, but I don't know. I don't think that I want to give it to you. I want to leave that to you. Do you see anything there?
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense to me. Every film I do, I kind of starting to perversely like that when people say, "Oh, there's no, you know, you're all over the map," and I go, "Well, aren't we all like in our minds how you see your own life?" It's like, well, I dated this girl, and then I moved here, and then I did that, and you look at someone's life, and like, what the hell are you doing? You studied this, you dropped out, like nothing makes sense. But to the individual, it all makes sense. Here's why I did that. Here's what attracted me to this. Here's why I moved here. Here's why I don't do this, and I do that. It all makes sense to you.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the analogy to my own films I did. It's like, it was a story I really got obsessed with.
Right.
And then within that, it's like, oh, here's how I wanted to try to tell that particular story. I'm in this genre, and here's the way I thought I would try to communicate that to an audience. So I don't know if there's,
you see that there are certain filmmakers where there's a clear connection, right? So I guess, and
absolutely.
I think it's more of a testament to you that you have that kind of versatility.
I admire that too. It's just, again, that's just a personality thing. I'm kind of promiscuous in that way, and don't see myself as a fixed artistic entity. I don't okay, here's what I do.
I have to, right.
Here's my stylistic flourish. It's we're stuck with ourselves no matter what. I just happen to have this, my life is like somewhere between a documentary filmmaker and a novelist. I'm cutting out articles, I read, I just spend all my time reading, researching, writing subjects. I come at it from much more of a intellectual and kind of what I'm passionate about, kind of from a subject matter viewpoint. So I'm that. I'm not like a
specialist.
I don't think so. But that doesn't mean anything. That's just
it's an arbitrary.
The cards I was dealt in my own psyche and my own approach. I do admire. I don't know what it means. Just everyone's different,
right?
And hats off to anyone who can do anything, really.
And there are people that have tried to, I guess they've asked you to read into, what do your films say about you, or things like that. And I'd seen one quote where you say it's only a vibe, collectively maybe only a vibe of who I am. Doesn't seem like you're interested necessarily in expressing your personal story through film. Is that fair to say? It's just sort of stories that interest you?
Well, yeah, but a lot of it does come from, if I had to break it down, a lot of my films, I'll come out in a minute, are very autobiographical.
Really?
Yeah. I have a pretty deep connection to everything I do. For some, I can explain it. But then that's the deeper part of me.
Right.
On the surface, maybe not so much. But like any film of mine, I can explain my own place in it.
Right.
Something like Slacker or Dazed and Confused, that is my life. That's friends, family, my own personal experiences. Before Sunrise was based on a night I had with, even when I do stuff like a studio film, School of Rock. Like, I lived in that room. You know, I see myself as, in a parallel life, I am Jack's character.
Right.
A guy who has some passion. It wasn't rock and roll, but it was filmmaking, you know, who's laying around in a little room and everyone thinks he's kind of a bum. But, you know, he does have something to maybe say. You know, I tap into that part of myself, you know. Bad News Bears, I am Billy Bob Thornton. You know, I was a baseball player who was right on the margins of maybe being at another level, and you know, I like that kind of character. I like those kids. You know, so I mean, it's all the stories, all the movies out there maybe being made. Why do I do the ones I do? It's, you know, it's obviously there's some connection there. You wouldn't do it, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say exact point by point autobiographical, but at the end of the day, they're all very personal.
Right.
And yet, I don't know if they're, you know, like Bernie is, I grew up in East Texas, this is set in East Texas. It's very personal. Now, have I been to prison? I've visited prisons.
Right.
I had a dad who was a prison guard. Have I killed someone? Am I a closeted gay man? No, but I know this world. I really close to home, not point by point autobiographical.
If somebody, setting aside Bernie for a second, because with all the rest of your films, if somebody could only see one Richard Linklater film and try and get the best sense of what you're about and what you're capable of, what would you
capable of on what level?
Well, that's why I leave that up to you. But I mean, just to
as a film director, as a person, as a
you interpret it as you'd like. But I guess I just want, you know, if somebody had, if they'd never seen one of your films and wanted to see what you were about, what would you encourage them to see?
Good Lord, that's a hard one. I don't know. It really depends on the person. I don't know. I think in some way before what's going to be a trilogy, Sunrise, Sunset, and now Midnight, that's something about, but it's in one area of myself.
I was hoping you would say that though, because
but it's in one area of myself. It's not
all,
you know,
sure.
Yeah.
But that was the reason I would say I was hoping you would say that, because that was sort of my introduction to you. Mm-hmm. I missed the initial Slacker and Dazed and Confused, really, but after the before films, I mean, I've been in love ever since. That was like those, and I just wonder, you know, they do seem in some ways to feature almost representative elements in a way of other things that you've done, and just people. I think if people see those, they do you feel that you get a stronger response almost in a way because inherently you are. It's such an intimate experience. You're seeing these two people. It's very intimate.
Yeah, and honest. You know, it's attempting to be real in some way. So, as much as a film can be, maybe, or you know, or we try. So, those films are, you know, we set a bar really high for what we're trying to communicate and how we're trying to do it. They're always difficult, but they're, you know.
And are those the ones that you were sort of implying that some of these movies could not get made today? Obviously, you've now laid the groundwork years ago with the first one and the first two, but do you think if you were the young filmmaker who came along today and said, I want to make a movie that's basically people walking and talking for 2 hours, what kind of a response would you get today?
Well, I think that's the kind of film that can get made today. That's the kind of film that always gets made. It's almost falling into like you have in the you know, kind of genre films and the intimate relationship movies. I think the before movies are kind of in the relationship side of it, and those actually can exist on a smaller scale and be as valuable as they're going to be valuable to anyone. So that's the kind of film I can get made today. It's harder to get made is the period film that's, you know, that costs a little more, or the, you know, depending on what kind of story, you know. So.
And Bernie was you originally, I think, said you thought like maybe you could get $12 million or something for it, and it ends up being $5 million with 22 days. That was a surprise.
With 3 major stars, you know. But that says everything you need to know about
how it's changed,
how the world is right now, and that's a struggle. It's just kind of like, I mean, it's films. You know, we all have stories to tell. People, you know, want to tell a variety of stories. It's almost like we have to.
Right.
And yet the system has changed so much where they're like, yeah, great, go tell the story. Raise money, do what you got to do privately.
Right.
We may or may not distribute it, but like the industry is less, they don't really care anymore about what story you're trying to tell. They don't really, there's genres, and it's just, more than ever,
Packaged.
it's a business, but it always has been.
Jack Black just said that you are his favorite filmmaker to work with. This is now 9 years between the two projects, but he said they were highlights basically of his career and wants to do more. What, I know the first collaboration was sort of an arranged marriage, because as you were saying, for you I guess you were you came onto the film after he was already a
private. There was a script and Jack, and that's about when I came in.
Right, and so but even then you had this idea that you would make a movie about Bernie and that Jack would be the guy?
Not right then. It was after working with Jack.
Right.
Like in the year after, it's like, I really liked him. I think he's such a great actor, such an interesting guy, such an amazing toolkit of talents Jack possesses. So, but he was a little young at that moment. I was like, I just thought he would. I immediately was doing all these other films, so I was like, Bernie never really went away.
Right.
And then at some point, it's like, okay, Jack would be great for that.
Right.
But it was kind of hard to. It was a little scary to pull out a film that I've been trying to make, but not that actively. It was solidly on a back burner. But I have a lot of films on the various burners, and I was like, okay, that one, the planets could align if Jack wanted to do that.
Right.
So I have all these films I'm trying to do that they never really go away, or that's a good litmus test. If years later I have films I'm working on 10 years later, I'm still writing, I'm still reading books on the subject, I'm taking notes on various great stages.
It's amazing, because this one was like 13 years in the making, right?
Yeah, the trial was in 99.
And you just
the events were 98, and
And you were absorbed immediately because you were at the trial. I mean, you saw. What do you think it was that you responded to there? Just the craziness of it all.
Yeah, kind of the surreal situation. But really, those two characters, I wanted to know more about that relationship.
Right.
Miss Nugent and Bernie. What a complex relationship that is. And it took me until I finally met Bernie himself.
Right.
And it all started to piece itself together. Thankfully, right before we started shooting, because you do a film as a kind of a quest.
Right.
You're trying to discover something about yourself or your subject matter. You're exploring. That's how I feel. Every movie, I'm kind of exploring something. I don't maybe know what I feel
or where it's going.
Yeah, I'm not really trying to convey a fixed thing like, here's my, I'm kind of feeling my way through it. And Bernie more so than ever, I was like, what is that relationship there? How did it get so bad that would happen? And then it's funny,
Right.
It's a kind of tragic comedy, black comedy, but it was only somewhere along the way I realized, he was her only friend. He liked her too much to leave her. It would hurt her too much, so she had to leave him.
Right.
And that explains a lot, when you really get into the depths of an abusive relationship. And it happens tragically all the time. People who can't leave, but they're too attached. It would hurt them too much if I left them. So, but my part of you is going, you can't live like this.
Yeah.
You aren't going to make it another day if you don't get out of this, but you can't leave. It's weakness, we all have these weaknesses, and Bernie had a huge weakness, trying to be liked too much and caring too much for people who that wasn't reciprocated, so that can get you in a lot of trouble in this world.
Sure. Sure can.
Yeah, and it's tragic.
Yeah. My final question, and I will set you free, is just this movie has been so well received. I mean, it's more than made back its money quite a bit, right? And reviews have been phenomenal.
It was really well. All that.
And I guess I just want to ask you. I mean, there are people right now that are going around saying this is Richard Linklater's my favorite Richard Linklater film, best Richard Linklater film. So first of all, what does that mean to you to just see the response? And secondly, for those people who are maybe new converts to you, what's next? I know you say there's always things percolating, and before midnight now, I think those who have been with you for all these years would love to probably know what that is. This the end of the trilogy? So Bernie Part 1 and then The
Bernie
Future
being,
Part 2.
No, I mean, it's great when people... I think my last two films are two of my best. You know, me and Orson Welles didn't have the distribution that Bernie had, but in a whole different way. I think that's one of my best films, and I think Bernie is too. I love that every new film is a new film. You know, it's what I'm interested in, so I'm always thrilled that people say, oh, that's one of your best, or I get this a lot now. It's like, oh, we didn't expect this from you, and you know, like, oh, what's this?
Right,
and
right.
then they're starting to kind of expect, like, oh, what they're not.
Right.
Early on, it was like, what's this film? How are you attached to this? This doesn't seem like your kind of thing, and now people kind of grudgingly accept whatever different path. So I'm lucky to be in that category. I think that I can do all different kinds of things. And Bernie's just one more, so you know, it's always great if people seem to like it. You know?
Right. And then the Part 2, The Future, and particularly Before Midnight.
I think the next film out will undoubtedly be Before Midnight, sometime in 2013. So I'm lucky to get to that. You know, this is the third one we've done in this trilogy. It's been 18 years. Julie Delpy, Ethan Hawke, and myself have been collaborating on these. And no, it's a long life, you know. Them and their characters are in their early 40s, so as we all know, that's not even the halfway part, you know. So who the hell knows? Who knows what life has in store? But it felt good. This one's different, you know. It's a different stage of life. It's a lot like the other two films, but then they're just at a different place. Yeah. So there's a, you know, that's kind of an endless possibility, but we certainly haven't talked about it. At this point we're always exhausted. It takes about 6 years for us to realize we have anything new to say.
No, I'm just relieved you haven't closed the door on a future.
No, I don't think that. I don't know if that door ever closes. Right. You know, just like, you know, your own life. Does it ever close until it closes?
Hope not.
Yeah, I don't know. So.
Well, thank you for all the great hours in the movie theater and for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, good talking to you.